The first time Maris Vane asked me to touch her, I nearly dropped the bottle of sunscreen into the swimming pool. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon in June, the kind of day when the sun seemed determined to expose every secret a person had spent years trying to hide. We were standing beside the pool of a luxury resort 3 hours from the city, surrounded by investors, executives, and people who wore expensive sunglasses even when they were standing in the shade. Maris was my boss, and I was the last person in the world who should have been standing that close to her. She handed me the bottle and turned slightly away. She had already changed into a modest navy blue swimsuit beneath a loose white cover-up, and her expression was as calm and professional as it always was. "Could you help me with this?" she asked, and I stared at the bottle in my hand, then at her, then back at the bottle. "I can't reach the middle of my back," she added. My heart was beating so loudly I was certain the people beside us could hear it. That I had worked for Maris Vane for almost 4 years, and during that time, I had learned that she was the most intimidating woman I had ever met. She ran Vane architecture with a calm intelligence that made powerful men lower their voices around her. She could walk into a meeting where everyone disagreed and leave 30 minutes later with a solution that somehow made everyone believe it had been their idea. But underneath that confidence, there had always been something else, something lonely, something I understood far too well. And I reached for the sunscreen, trying to keep my hands steady, and then Maris looked over her shoulder, smiled softly, and whispered, "That's not where I meant that." If you believe that kindness can lead to second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Invisible Line. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people who change our lives are not the ones we were looking for. Sometimes they are the ones standing beside us on an ordinary afternoon, carrying wounds we never knew existed. I froze so completely that for one humiliating second, I forgot how to breathe. Maris saw the panic on my face and immediately laughed, not the polished laugh she used during business dinners, a real laugh, the kind that reached her eyes. "I meant my shoulder," she said. "You were aiming too low." That I exhaled so hard, she laughed again. "Sorry," I muttered. "I thought you meant—" "What?" "Nothing." She turned away, still smiling. But the strange thing was that the embarrassment between us didn't disappear. It changed. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like I was standing beside Maris the woman instead of Maris the boss, and that frightened me more than it should have done. My name is Dorian Hale, and before I worked for Vane Architecture, I spent 7 years learning how dangerous it could be to care about someone in the wrong place. That I had once been engaged. Her name was Celine. We met when I was 25, when I was still foolish enough to believe love was something that happened automatically if you worked hard enough for it. Celine was beautiful, ambitious, and full of plans. I loved that about her, until I realized that none of her plans included the person I actually was. She wanted the version of me that might someday become successful. She wanted the house I might buy, the title I might earn, the life I might eventually provide. When my father became sick and I left a better-paying job to help care for him, Celine began looking at me differently. When the medical bills drained my savings, she became colder. And when my father died 6 months later, she left. She didn't scream, she didn't cheat, she simply sat across from me at our kitchen table and said she needed a life that was moving forward. That I had been grieving my father, and suddenly I was grieving a future that had never been as real as I thought it was. That was why I stopped believing that getting close to people was safe. That was why I never dated anyone at work, and that was exactly why the moment beside that pool bothered me. Maris had hired me when I was 32. I started as a project coordinator, worked harder than anyone else because I had nothing waiting for me at home, and slowly became the person she trusted most. That I knew how she took her coffee, that I knew she became quiet when she was overwhelmed, that I knew she had a small scar near her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, that I knew she never talked about her family, but I also knew that I had no right to know anything beyond that. So I kept a distance, or at least I tried. The resort trip was supposed to be simple. Our company was negotiating a partnership to restore an abandoned coastal district into affordable housing, parks, and small business spaces. Maris had personally fought for the project because the area had once been home to working families before years of neglect had driven most of them away. The investors wanted luxury hotels. Maris wanted homes. That was the difference between her and most people in her position. She could have made more money by agreeing with the investors. Instead, she stood in conference rooms and fought for people who probably would never know her name. That afternoon, after the sunscreen incident, I found her sitting alone at the edge of the pool. Everyone else was laughing and drinking nearby. Maris was staring at the water. "You should be enjoying yourself," I told her. "So should you." "I am." She glanced at me. "Dorian, you look like you're attending a funeral." "That's just my face." She smiled again. Then she asked me to sit beside her. I did, for several minutes. Neither of us spoke. The sun reflected across the water, and somewhere behind us, someone dropped a glass. People laughed. Then Maris quietly said that her mother had died when she was 19. Then I looked at her. She was still watching the pool. She told me that her father had been a brilliant architect, but also a distant man. After her mother died, work became the only thing they shared. He taught her everything about design, buildings, business, and leadership. But he never taught her how to talk about pain, that she learned not to. When he died 8 years later, she inherited the company and the same terrible habit of hiding everything. "That I think people see me and assume I'm strong," she said. "You are strong." She shook her head. "That's not the same as being okay." I didn't know what to say. Maybe because I understood that. So instead of giving her advice, I simply sat beside her. Sometimes kindness is nothing more than refusing to leave when someone finally stops pretending. That evening, the investors hosted a dinner on an outdoor terrace overlooking the ocean. I sat at the far end of the table, watching Maris do what she always did: smile, listen, negotiate, fight. But halfway through dinner, one of the investors, a man named Corbin Ash, made a joke about how emotionally attached Maris had become to the housing project. "You're running a business, Maris," he said, "not a charity." The table went quiet. Maris smiled politely. Then she explained with remarkable calm that the company had always been profitable without abandoning its values. Corbin leaned back. "You sound almost sentimental." Something changed in her face, only slightly, but I saw it. She had been sentimental. She had just spent the afternoon telling me that she had grown up in an apartment above a bakery because her father had almost lost everything after her mother died. She had been poor enough to know what it meant to fear rent day. She didn't want families pushed out because wealthy investors wanted prettier views. That I wanted to defend her, but she spoke before I could. "Maybe sentimentality is simply remembering what it felt like to need help," she said. No one laughed after that. Later, I found her outside, standing alone near the railing. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Of course." "You know I hate that answer." She looked surprised. "You do?" "Yes." For a moment, I expected her to pull away. Instead, she leaned against the railing. "Corbin thinks I'm weak," she said. "Corbin thinks kindness is weakness because he doesn't understand either." She looked at me. The ocean breeze moved through her hair, and suddenly I saw something dangerous in her expression. Trust. That was the beginning of everything. Over the following weeks, the coastal project became more difficult. Investors threatened to withdraw funding. Newspapers began criticizing vain architecture for taking financial risks. Corbin started pushing privately for Maris to accept his revised proposal. She refused. Then came the night I found her still working in the office after midnight. Her shoes were off. Her head was resting against the desk. There were papers everywhere. That I walked inside and quietly placed a cup of coffee beside her. She opened one eye. "Dorian, you missed dinner." "So did I." "I brought takeout." That made her sit up. For the next hour, we ate noodles from cartons while reviewing architectural plans. It was one of the happiest nights I had experienced in years. And that terrified me, because happiness had once disappeared from my life without warning. The next morning, I avoided her. I answered emails, attended meetings, spoke only when necessary. By afternoon, Maris had noticed. She waited until the office was empty, then walked to my desk. Did I do something wrong? No. Then why are you avoiding me? I looked up at her. Because you are my boss. Because I'm starting to care. Because the last time I trusted someone, I spent years trying to understand why I wasn't worth staying for. Instead, I said, I'm not avoiding you. Maris folded her arms. Dorian. That I sighed. That was the problem with working for a woman who could read blueprints and people with equal precision. That I finally told her the truth. Not everything, but enough. That I told her about Celine, about my father, about learning how quickly a person could become inconvenient when life became difficult. Maris listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said that people often believed heartbreak made them cautious, but sometimes, she whispered, it just makes them lonely. That sentence stayed with me, because I knew she was right. The following month, the coastal project nearly collapsed. Corbin convinced 2 investors to withdraw funding. The board wanted Maris to compromise. And for the first time since I had known her, I watched her doubt herself. That I found her sitting on the floor of an unfinished community center at the project site. Sunlight poured through the open windows. Workers had stopped construction. Everything was silent. That I failed them, she said. No. Dorian, we can't continue without funding. You haven't failed. I promised. Her voice broke, and suddenly she wasn't my boss. She was the 19-year-old girl who had lost her mother, the woman who inherited a company before she had learned how to heal, the person who spent her entire life trying to build things that would not disappear. That I sat beside her. Then I told her about my father, that he had once taught me that not every house needed to be perfect before someone could call it home. Sometimes, he said, people moved into places with unfinished walls because waiting for perfection meant never living at all. And Maris turned towards me. What are you saying? I'm saying this project isn't finished, but the money will find another way. She laughed sadly. With what? With the reason you wanted this place built in the first place. For the first time in weeks, I saw hope in her eyes. That we launched a public campaign. We invited local business owners, community groups, and former residents to tell their stories. We opened the unfinished site to the public and showed people what the project could become. And people came. Not because they knew Maris Vane, but because they recognized something she had never seen in herself. They recognized kindness. Within 3 weeks, smaller investors joined. Local companies donated materials. Construction unions offered reduced rates. Former residents organized fundraisers. The project was saved. The day construction officially resumed, Maris and I returned to the same resort where everything had begun. Not for business, just because neither of us wanted to admit how much that strange afternoon had changed us. That we stood beside the pool. The sun was warm, the water was bright. Maris handed me a bottle of sunscreen. I looked at it. She smiled. Oh no, I said. I remember what happened last time. She laughed. Then she stepped closer. This time, I really do mean my back. That I took the bottle from her. But before I could say anything else, she added, and maybe my heart. That I looked at her. The smile disappeared from her face. She suddenly looked nervous. Maris Vane, the woman who could negotiate with billionaires without blinking. Nervous. Then I realized that courage wasn't being fearless. It was allowing yourself to be seen. So I told her that I had been afraid too. Afraid of loving someone connected to my work. Afraid of ruining what we had. Afraid that the moment I finally needed someone, they would decide I was too difficult to love. Maris stepped closer.
Then she told me that she didn't want me to stay because life was easy. She wanted to know if I could stay when it wasn't. That was the difference. Celine had loved the future version of me. Maris was standing in front of the man I actually was. Imperfect, afraid, still healing. And she stayed. Our relationship did not begin with a kiss, but it began with a decision. We spoke to the board, created clear boundaries, and I transferred away from reporting directly to her. I moved into the community development division while Maris remained CEO. It was complicated. Sometimes, love is. But this time, we didn't run because something was difficult. We worked through it. A year later, the first families moved into the completed coastal housing project. There was music in the streets. Children rode bicycles along the new paths. Local shops opened their doors. And Maris stood beside me, watching everything she had nearly lost come alive. She reached for my hand. Cameras were pointed at us. Investors were watching. There was nothing to gain, nothing to prove. She simply held my hand. Then I looked at her and remembered that first afternoon by the pool when one awkward sentence had nearly sent my heart into my throat. "That's not where I meant," she had said. At the time I thought she was